Hey friends, welcome back to Unheard Stories. In today's episode, an incredible topic awaits. To people who have also worked with multimillionaires or billionaires, what is something different they do from ordinary people? Story 1. Years ago, a friend of mine's dad was trying to sell his startup company and picked up an investor at the airport. He was proud of his classic Rolls-Royce and noticed the investor looking around, playing with the air vents. So he said, "Is this your first time in a Rolls-Royce?" The guy said no, but it was his first time in the front seat. I used to do in-person one-on-one market research interviews with luxury car owners, and one thing that wondered me after hundreds of interviews was that the only people who drove Rolls-Royces themselves were self-made new money wealthy people. The old money people all had Rolls-Royces, but they were driven around in them. Because that's one of the reasons that you get a Rolls, is the incredible back seat. If the old money were driving themselves, then they would have luxury cars, but they very rarely drove Rolls. It may have been one of those social faux pas to wealthy old money to be in the same seat as their drivers or something like that, but I never actually asked about it. Story 2. He managed time very differently than anyone I was used to. Our meeting with him began precisely on schedule, lasted 30 minutes, and there was no chit-chat. Before this meeting, we had a pre-meeting with his admin to discuss expectations. The admin explained that we had to be on time. No introductions, titles, just names, no small talk, no marketing, and be prepared to answer technical and financial questions quickly and succinctly. For this latter, if there were numbers, we had to know precisely which page of the material had the information. When the meeting took place, we were brought in exactly, to the second, at the start time. Sat down, and within 30 seconds, he was asking us all manner of questions. I had to field technical questions that appeared to be asked not so much for whether my answer was right, but that I didn't hesitate. I also gained a healthy respect for my manager, as he was sharp and answered quickly and accurately. Story 3. One old money rich person treated me to a fancy meal, and she was super polite and nice and tipped well. What struck me was the decisiveness and confidence that everyone there would cater to her, and they did. She wanted X dish that they didn't make that day, and they made it. The one that sticks with me was at the end when she said, "I want a cappuccino with something. I want them to put a design on it." I've gotten cute cappuccinos in my life. It doesn't even cost extra. It never occurred to me to just ask for everything I want all the time. This was the same person that on a business trip hugged after the flight. "I did it." Me. "Oh, was this your first time in economy?" And she goes, "No, flying commercial, just so we all understand how rich." Story 4. My aunt and uncle are self-made multimillionaires. If you met them, you'd think they were well off, but nothing spectacular. In general, they're both very frugal. However, the two areas where they completely detach from ordinary life are 1. Vet bills for their animals. The example that most stands out in my mind is their last dog. He needed dialysis and no vet where we live could provide it. So they did their research and discovered that the best treatment in the country was available in London. A flat in Kew, I think, somewhere fairly central anyway, was rented for the 6 months the dog would need treatment, and my uncle would stay in it for 1 week a month while the dog had his treatment, then travel back home for the other 3 weeks. 2. Legal help. Are neighbors being a pain in the backside? Send in the solicitor. Trying to organize a purchase or sale and it's taking too long? Pay the solicitor to fast track. Local council leaving traffic lights up for over a week after work has been completed? Cry havoc and let slip the solicitors of war. Story 5. One of my friends is going to be a billionaire soon. His father passed, and he's the sole heir to the family fortune. He already had access to it, but he chose to live a middle-class life instead. It's important to him to teach his kids the value of hard work. Story 6. I work with lots of millionaires and a few billionaires. Most work non-stop. There's no boundary between workday, holiday, weekend, etc. But there is also no boundary between friends, family, co-workers lots of times. It is easy to forget the cost of things when money is meaningless. When a $500K Ferrari is the financial equivalent of a gallon of milk for most families. Then spending $20K on a party that includes private chefs, a bar staff, etc. is nothing. What happened recently was that someone mentioned there were a bunch of kids in the Master of Science who were getting trained at trade schools for jobs, but the certification exam was $350. So only 2 kids out of the 35 in our pilot program got certified. It was hard for anyone in that room to understand how these families couldn't come up with $350 after having a whole year to prepare. Most people in that room bill at $250 500/HR, if they work at all. 2 days ago, someone took me out to lunch, and the bill was $250. But since it's Christmas season and the waitress was really great, he tipped $250. A different time, we went out for drinks at the bartender was one of those, "Tell me what you like and I'll make you something." The lady goes to pay and just writes math in the tip line and put $500 on the total for what was less than 3 drinks a person for 4 of us. On the other hand, there are lots of times when someone says something completely off the wall elitist. I grew up incredibly poor, and some of these people are 5th and 10th generation wealth. They grew up with maids and butlers and private planes, and their great-grandparents have buildings all over the US named after them. One time one of them was talking about how she went to Walmart to people watch and never felt unsafe even though it was the black part of town. She tried to make some black friends because if she could befriend them, then she could educate them on better financial decisions. It was such a condescending approach, we had to counsel her to never do that again. Another guy says things like, "The blacks will," and he thinks he's very woke. Aside from all that, there's a general loss of touch with what everyday people face. Story 7. I worked with their children in a professional manner and felt bad for them. They lack empathy and basic social skills, and are just beasts to anyone they feel is outside their economic class. You would be surprised how much money gets spent on cover-ups for their kids. Story 8. I've worked in 2 companies that went from nothing to $2B sales in 20 years. The founders were all engineers and still worked alongside us. My favorite one used to ask permission to sit at my lunch table. He's easily the greatest human being I've ever known. You'd never know the kind of money he had if you saw him. He still drove the car he restored himself in college. He'd drive across town to save 5 cents per gallon on gas. Just from his public stock trades, we knew he had hundreds of millions, though. This was in the 90s. I still talk to him. I emailed him last week. Honestly, all of the founders have been something like him, although he was the greatest one. The others did spend their money, though, sometimes extravagantly. One, for example, had married a history major and had the hobby of relocating historic buildings to his property. His house had museum-quality antiques, such as George Washington's dinner table, and he used them. I guess by the strictest definition, I'm a multimillionaire, as the first digit of my Fidelity account does go to 2 sometimes. As a nearly 50-year-old engineer, that's not that unusual, though. Millionaires aren't what they used to be. Story 9. I nannied for millionaires. It was new money, and they had both grown up fairly blue-collar. They were very down-to-earth, giving, and kind. Their children, however, had no rules, structure, or expectations inside of the house. Their previous nanny gave them whatever they wanted. That changed when I stepped in. I firmly believe kids need to know how to clean a bathroom, wash dishes, sweep the floor, and clean their rooms. Took about a year to get to that point, but I can rest easy knowing they're both currently in college and know how to clean everything. Story 10. They play the long game. They don't really think about what will happen short-term as much. They ignore monthly costs, but pay attention to costs over 5, 10 years. Same with income. The short-term is viewed as if they're on track for the long-term,